Hello, my name is John Ford, and welcome to my Proxmox Automated Environment Provisioning course series. In the previous video, I showed you how, as an instructor or as a manager, you can go ahead and set up a basic environment that users can then access and create their own copy of. This video will be similar to the last one, except I'll be showcasing a more complex environment. In addition, the configuration options that I talked about in the previous video, I will only briefly mention here. So if you're ever confused about something that you see in this video, feel free to go back to the last one and use that as a reference. In the last video, if you remember, we set up a very simple 3-machine environment. However, in this one, I'll show you how to set up a full-fledged competition network environment with 2 interfaces for each user. Let's say that I have a group of students that I am preparing for the NCE Cyber Games competition, which takes place in the spring. This competition has students actively defending networks while they're being attacked in real time. It also requires students to configure the machines that are on the network and get the services up and running. I have taken the original competition network diagram and I have made a couple changes. Most notably, I have removed a few machines just to make the environment a little smaller. In addition, during the actual competition, students are required to set up the static IP addresses themselves. This includes every IP address except for the one for the external Kali VM, which is DHCP assigned. However, for practice, I don't want to make my students set up all of the IP addresses themselves, so I will actually assign all of these machines static IP addresses using Cloud Init. However, I will leave the interfaces on the team router unassigned so that students can go in and practice configuring the interfaces on the router. In this setup, we will be using the pfSense firewall as our external gateway, and it will also be serving DNS records. The last thing I would like to mention is I don't know who's going to show up for the practice session that I am hosting. Therefore, I'd like students to be able to register on the spot and immediately have access to their own environment. For this reason, I'm not going to spin this up for a predefined set of users. Instead, I am going to create a registration page and provide students with an access code where they can then go ahead and register and gain access to their one copy of this environment. Here I have a split screen where on the right-hand side, you can see the environment that I was showcasing before that we will be setting up. On the left-hand side is my management machine within Proxmox, although yours could be external to Proxmox, that I am going to configure in order to provide students with access to this environment. As a note, depending on your installation, you may have this file in a different location, but the most important file here is this config.ini. For me, I have it in the etc/proxmox directory. This config.ini file defines all of the configuration settings that will allow us to set up a web interface where students will then go in, register, and then access one instance of their environment. Now I'll show you how that configuration is done. I'm going to open and edit this config file using mousepad because that is easiest for me. Feel free to use Nano or another terminal editor or another graphical editor as you so please. I'm going to make this a little bigger so it's a little bit easier to see. Okay, first we have to worry about setting up our users. We want our users to be able to register themselves, and in this case our students register themselves on a registration page, and therefore we're going to set register to true or just leave it at its default value. Now we have to set an access code that we will provide our students that will allow them to use the registration page to create new users. In this case, I'll just make my access code @ access C code, just like that. Then we can choose to add all of our students to a specific group within Proxmox. That will allow us to really easily see who decided to join our competition practice. So if I go to my data center here and I click on groups, you can see that I went ahead and I created this seminar group. I just clicked create and created a group and named it seminar. So here I will specify the name seminar for registrant groups. This means anytime a new user registers on the registration page, they will automatically be added and show up in this seminar group. We don't have to worry about changing passwords. That's for a different form of authentication. And here we will choose where we want to store our credentials to. This is optional, but if we have users who are creating users on this Proxmox instance, it would be nice to be able to see their credentials. And so we can store those automatically to a file. And I'll just put that in etc proxmox creds.csv just so that it's in the same directory that this configuration file is in. Then from here, we'll choose the IDs of the virtual machines that we want to clone. In my case, the virtual machines have IDs 450 through 455. So this looks good. I'll set it to 450 to 455. The name that we will prepend to the virtual machine clones will simply be the user's username. So I'll just leave it as $user. $user is actually a wildcard that will automatically be replaced with the user's username. Similarly, $ID is a wildcard that will be replaced with the unique ID of the environment. All right. The clone begin ID is the ID that we want to start at for virtual machine clones. So I can just change it to 600, let's say. The clone type we'll leave as linked. This will be much faster in cloning than if we were to do a full clone. The snapshot name we can leave like it is. This basically creates a snapshot that users can revert to if they ever want to revert their machines. Here we can specify different permissions that the students will have over their virtual machines. In this case, I do just want them to be virtual machine users, so I will leave it at its default and keep this line commented out. From here, I do want to automatically start the cloned virtual machines after they have been cloned, so I will leave this at true. I would like to create an additional Linux bridge. So keep in mind that we have this one LAN that's going to be the same for all the students. However, in addition to that, each student is going to get their own internal LAN. So we need to create a bridge that's going to host that LAN, right? All right. So then we need to choose a subnet for that bridge. As you can see here, it's 192.168.teamnumber.0/24. So here I just put 192.168.id.0/24. Here the ID will effectively act as the team number. From here, if necessary, I could attach a port or slave to the new bridge. For example, if I wanted to give it internet access. In this case, I want students to get internet access by configuring their router and then going through the router. So in this case, I will not attach any ports. I will leave this option commented out. From here, I will specify which virtual machines I want to be on this new bridge, right? Now, as you can see, I want the router to be connected, the web server to be connected, the DNS to be connected, and the internal Kali to be connected. So here we have the firewall or router, These are one and the same, by the way. I just chose to name it firewall here, but I named it router here. So we'll say 450. We also want the web and DNS, so we might as well just say 450 to 452. And then put a comma, and in addition, we want this Kali internal machine to be connected. So then I'll put 454, and we should be good to go there. Now, remember, as I said before, I do want to assign these machines IP addresses using Cloud Init, except for the router or firewall that I'll let the students configure. So I'll uncomment this, and for Cloud Init static, I'll specify the virtual machine ID or the template ID, and then a comma, and then what IP address I want to provide it with. So in this case, let's start with the shell FTP server. The shell is on 453, right? Or has ID 453, so I'll say 453. And for the IP address, we have 172.18.14. And then the team number, which in this case is going to be the unique ID, right? Then from here, I'll do the web server. The web server, which has ID 451, will assign it an IP address of 192.168.ID.5. For the DNS, which is ID 452, we'll do 192.168.ID.12. And then for our internal Kali VM, our internal Kali VM is at 454. So I'll do 454, 192.168.ID.10. And we should be good to go there. All right. Would I like to configure the pfSense firewall to serve DHCP on the newly created bridge? I in fact would not, because all these machines are going to be using static IP addresses, and our pfSense firewall in this case isn't connected to any of the internal machines. The only place it'll be serving DHCP is to this external Kali virtual machine. So therefore, I'm going to set this to false. We can skip some of these options here because we set firewall to false. For example, we don't need to create the DHCP pool begin address or end address. We don't have to specify DNS servers. And we don't have to do any static IP assignments. The last configuration changes I'm going to make is to modify the create time, revert time, and destroy time. This is the amount of seconds that the students will have to wait when creating, reverting, or destroying their environments. It's good to test these out a couple of times before you actually set these times. And I've provided a test.php page that you can actually visit to perform accurate tests and measure how long each of these operations take. However, for the sake of this example here, let's say I know that I can create this environment in maybe about 10 seconds. I can revert it in also 10 seconds, and I'll set the destroy time also to 10 seconds. So for each operation, the users will have to wait 10 seconds. Then scrolling down, the last thing is if you would like to log output from these clone and purge command calls to a file, you may do so here. However, I don't really care to log that output, especially since that'll be taking up extra space on my manager machine, so I just went ahead and commented these lines out. Now all I have to do is say File, Save, and now that I've saved my Proxmox configuration file, we're all good to go, all fully set up, and I'll show you what it looks like from a student's perspective. Actually, before I go ahead and do that, let me quickly show you my pfSense firewall configuration. So, remember that we have to serve DHCP to the external Kali machine on each of the cloned environments, right? So in order to do that, first I have to make sure that pfSense has the correct IP address on the LAN. Remember, we wanted it to be 172.18.0.1. If we go to Interfaces and we go to LAN, you'll notice that scrolling down, you can set the IP address here. I've set it to 172.18.0.1, and I've also made this a /16 network, or given it a net mask of 16 in CIDR notation. Once making those changes, you can click Save, and those changes will be saved. In addition, if we go back up to Services and DHCP Server, and scroll down, here we can set the actual DHCP pool, or the DHCP IP addresses that will be given to the external Kali machines on each of the student environments. So here I just set the range from 172.18.15.1 to 172.18.15.255. The IDs that are assigned here through DHCP are going to be the same as that $ID wildcard that we used earlier in the configuration file. That's because that wildcard starts at 1 and increases consecutively, right? And so we're basically doing the same thing here. Anyway, once that is configured, you can scroll all the way down. Oh, I should also mention, I specified this firewall as my DNS server. Remember, I am actually serving DNS on this firewall as well. And here you can click Save and Apply to apply those changes. In addition, I should quickly mention that I created a static DHCP mapping for this address. This is where I'm going to host a web server. And if I go to Services DNS Resolver, you can see that I have created some custom DNS entries that will basically just point practice.org to this server. This means that anybody who visits practice.org on the external Kali machine will automatically be redirected to the website on the server that's basically just hosting the picture of the environment that I showed you earlier. Of course, all this stuff is optional. All this stuff is extra. I just decided to set it up this way. You could, of course, make any changes you want within pfSense. Really, the sky is the limit. All right. Well, anyway, now that I've showed you those, now I can go ahead and show you what that looks like from the student's perspective. Now I'll be acting as the student in a separate window where I am not signed into Proxmox. I have gone ahead and I have navigated to the website that was set during the setup. In this case, I just made it the IP address of 216.47.158.239, and it brings me to the login page. From here, since I don't have an account yet, I can go ahead and sign up. I'll just make my username John, and I'll make my password capital P, password 123 exclamation point. I'll confirm that password. And then in order to actually create a user and sign up, I need the access code provided by the instructor. Remember that we, as the instructor, set that earlier in the config.ini file. And we set that to access code with an @ symbol and capital C. So entering all that in, I can click Submit. And now my user has created and I'm redirected back to the login page, where I can log in as the user I just created. So John, password 123 exclamation point. Now once I'm logged in, I'm greeted with this control panel where I can start my environment. And after waiting 10 seconds, my environment will be started. And once the environment is started, I can access it by clicking the Access button. From here, you can see all my machines that I have access to as John. If I click on any one of these machines and click on the Console tab, I'll be able to directly see the console of this machine. While John's environment is running, I just wanted to come back to the instructor side of things and show you that when I'm logged in to Proxmox as the root user, I can see John's environment here. And you'll notice that the ID of the virtual machines started at the ID we provided of 600. Any additional users that then join and also create environments will be added to the bottom of this list here. Going back to looking at this environment from John's perspective, let's say I'm accessing the DNS server. I can log in with the credentials that the instructor provided. From here, if I check my IP address, you'll notice that the DNS server has been assigned its appropriate IP address of 192.168.1.12, and this has occurred through Cloud Init. Going back to the control panel, if John, let's say, ever made a mistake, he could always revert his environment by clicking the revert button. And then, when finished, if John no longer needs access to his environment, he can simply click stop. After waiting 10 seconds, the environment will be fully destroyed. And once completely finished, John can then go ahead and click sign out to sign out. As you can see, all of the configuration options for the web interface that students will be accessing are located in one single configuration file, which makes setting this all up really easy.